Hey everybody, I'm back again. Today we're looking at the Thieaudio Hype 4. This is the final video in a series of 3 videos looking at 3 different IEMs between $300 and $400 US. And so today, as I said, we've got the Thieaudio Hype 4. Yesterday I covered off the Tangzu Nezha. The day before that was the Letshuoer S15. And so looking at the Thieaudio Hype 4 that you've just seen here on the camera, it's a very different looking IEM with the white and sort of the multicolored glittery shell. But other than that, it's got some things in common with these others and a few things different. First of all, the price, as I've already said, sits within that $300 to $400 range, and specifically for the Hype 4, it's going to come in at $399 US, putting it at the same recommended retail price as the Tangzu Nezha. I want to kick off with a huge thanks to Linsol for sending out the Hype 4 for review. And then carrying on talking about the design of the Hype 4, the other things that you need to know is that these are using a combination of balanced armatures and dynamic drivers. Specifically, we've got 4 balanced armatures and 2 dynamic drivers in the Hype 4. But what it's doing, and this has been done with the Hype 2 that I've already reviewed here on the channel, and it's also been done in the Monarch Mark III, is that what they're doing is they're taking the dynamic drivers and they're running them in an isobaric setup. So essentially what that means is that both dynamic drivers are firing into the same sound chamber. And what that means is by using the 2 of them into the same chamber, you can actually drive them less to get the same output as a single dynamic driver. That means you're not pushing the drivers as hard, and therefore, theoretically, you can get better quality out of it. We'll decide in a minute whether that's true, but that's the theory behind it. That combination of drivers gives the Hype 4 a sensitivity of 105 decibels per milliwatt and an impedance of 17 ohms. So that means that they're almost identical to the other 2 we've reviewed here, being the S15 and the Nezha. And so all that really remains is to have a quick look at the accessories that you get with the Hype 4 and then jump into some sound quality. With the Hype 4, once you can get into the box, I hate these boxes with sleeves like this one. They're always hard to get out of the sleeves, I find. If anyone has a tip, other than trying to take it off straight, I know that one, but if anyone's got a tip on how to get these out, do let me know. In fact, let us all know down in the comments. Alright, so then inside we're going to get the Thieaudio case. We're kind of used to these now. It's the same case you get with the Monarch, the Prestige, etc. They come fitted with a couple of tips. And then inside the case, we've just got some little baggies with some very silicone tips. So I would say that the range of tips from Thieaudio is probably the least of the bunch here. Maybe they're on par with the S15s. Maybe the way the S15s are presented is nicer. I don't find the Thieaudio tips particularly good. They're not bad either, but definitely something like the Nezha with the Tangsankai tips is my preference. So putting all this away, and by the way, as I said yesterday in the Nezha review, I was saying that I didn't think that the Hype 4 had interchangeable connectors, and that's the case. So it does not have any interchangeable connectors. This one that I've got here is a 3.5mm termination. I'm not sure, just having a look at it, if you can get different terminations. It doesn't appear that you can, so it looks like they're only going to come with a 3.5mm. Perhaps if you have a look online, you can order it with the 4.4, but it's not written on the box anywhere here. So do be aware of that one if you care about getting a 4.4mm connector. I don't, because I use the Mojo 2 as my testing source, but for those that do care, it is worth checking out whether or not you can buy a 4.4, or maybe just write these off entirely if that's important to you, or buy yourself an aftermarket cable. These are using a 2-pin connector like most IEMs on the market these days, so very easy to get an aftermarket cable. But with all that said, let's start talking about the sound quality of the Hype 4. Now, in case you didn't see the last 2 videos, my testing setup for this is I'm running from Roon on my computer, and then I'm sending the signal from there out to the Chord Poly and the Chord Mojo 2. I'm also using the Final Audio E-type tips, so I get a consistent seal, good comfort, and I'm using the same tips across all IEMs that I'm listening to here. Let's take a listen. This is pure coincidence that I've landed on these as my last IEM to test. And the reason I say that it's coincidence is because they're almost like a combination between the Nezha, sort of a combination, I'll explain more, but they're somewhere in between and a mixture in some ways of the Nezha and the S15. And the reason I say that is they've got more bass than the Nezha. They've got a definite more solid sound, which is similar to the S15. These might be a little bit better. I'm going to test that for you in a moment. But the other thing that's worth noting is that they've also got a mid-range forward sound similar to the Nezha. So they're a little bit like the Nezha with a bit of extra bass, but then they're also like the S15 in the sense they've got the bass, but they probably lean a bit more into the upper mid-range emphasis than something like the Nezha. So you're getting that mid-range emphasis and bass, or upper mid-range emphasis and bass of the S15, combined with an overall mid-range emphasis and a lower mid-range emphasis that the Nezha has. So they're quite interesting in that regard. They're a sound that I think is probably not quite as tonally smooth. There's not quite as good continuity from each frequency band to the next as the Nezha. I think the Nezha is doing better there. But on the other hand, they've got a bit more energy and a bit more excitement than the Nezha without going so far that they're becoming a little bit unnatural like the S15 can at times. And so I think for this comparison, the best way I can explain these is to now roll through and take a listen to the Hype 4 up against the Nezha, the S15, and then also the Yanyin Canon 2, and give you my thoughts, what's similar, what's different between all of them, because hopefully you'll have heard at least one of them, or maybe you're looking at sort of tossing up between a couple of these for your choice, and hopefully I can give you a good sense of which one's which, where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are, etc. Now before I do that, I want to quickly mention today's channel sponsor, and that's Aura. I'm going to keep this quick because you might have seen the last two videos and already be well and truly aware of Aura. But what Aura is offering is a one-point solution, a single app solution for all of your online security needs. So things like VPN, password manager, spam protection, protection against scammers, hacking, all those wonderful things. And they're doing it all within a single app, as I mentioned, and therefore combining all those different services into a single price. In other words, you're not having to go out there and use a whole lot of different services and pay for a whole lot of different services separately. These are all going to be bundled up into a single app at one low price, ready for you to use in one location through Aura. And so if you don't currently have online protection, your data could be all over the internet, on the dark web. People could be using the information that's out there to try to access your sensitive private information, things like medical records, financial records, bank accounts. And so if you want to see what's already out there and you want to start cleaning it up straight away today, then viewers of Passion for Sound that are in the US can get a free 2-week trial of Aura by just going to aura.com/passionforsound. So it's a really easy way for you to go and see what's out there of yours on the net and start cleaning it up today. And as I said, that's going to help reduce the amount of spam you get. It's going to protect you from being scammed, from being hacked. They also offer identity theft insurance. So it's a great option that you can check out for 2 weeks for free by just going to aura.com/passionforsound or click the link in the description. And so thanks to Aura for sponsoring the video, and now let's get into this comparison of IEMs. I'm going to kick things off with the Canon 2 up against the Hype 4, and I'm listening to Olele by Ozymandias for this one. So let's see what we hear. The first thing I want to mention is that the Hype 4s have a lovely, impactful but controlled bass. This track really benefits from that, and the Hype 4s are sounding lovely, but there is just a little tiny bit of fatigue for me in the upper registers from the Hype 4s. So I'm going to jump over to the Canon 2 now and see what they do with it. Basically what we're getting here is that the Canon 2, and this is in the mid setup, so I could switch on a bit more bass out of these, and actually that's probably going to make it a bit of a fairer comparison, but I don't think the Canon 2, even at their most bassy, are ever going to quite match the impact, the tactility of the bass that the Hype 4 delivers. So if you do love to feel a good bass impact without it becoming a bass monster, because the Hype 4s aren't overly bassy, but they just have a lovely quality of bass, that's where I do think the Hype 4s are going to take the edge over the Canon 2. I think both IEMs have a lovely sense of forward mid-range that's quite well balanced overall. Where I think the Canon 2 has a slight edge, but it is very slight, is I think the trebles may be just a little bit more refined. The overall amount of treble is probably pretty similar between them, but I think the quality of that treble is just a touch better from the Canon 2. So it's hard to split. I think if I was reaching for one or the other, I might actually reach for the Hype 4, and that's purely because I do like the extra bit of bass kind of tactility and impact, although switching these up a step into the 2 switches on mode might actually fix that. Let me check. Interesting. So the bass quality is excellent from both. You can get a bit more bass out of the Yanyin Canon 2 with both switches on, but it's different. So the Canon 2 is going to give you bass that's more in the mid-bass region, and it's a little bit softer, only a very, very small amount softer, in the sense that it's not got quite the sense of control and tightness that the dynamic drivers from the Impact 2 system in the Hype 4 give you. So it's a tough call as to which one I like more. The Hype 4's bass is also deeper into the sub bass, and so it's going to depend on what you like the most. I think quality-wise, I might actually choose the Canon 2 with both switches on, And that's purely because most bass that occurs in music is more mid-bass than that deeper sub-bass. And it's not to say that the Hype 4 doesn't have mid-bass as well, but the emphasis goes a bit lower, and there's therefore just a little bit less continuity between the mid-range and the bass, I think, going to the Hype 4 compared to the Canon 2. But honestly, both are fantastic. If you want more impact, more thump, and more sub-bass, the Hype 4 is the choice. If you want a more balanced overall tonality, a slightly smoother transition between frequencies, and slightly better treble quality in my opinion, then I think the Canon 2 is probably the choice there. But let's now have a look and see how the Hype 4 compares to, say, the Nezha. Both have forward mid-range, but one has more bass, one is more focused on that transparency of the mid-range, that being the Nezha. So we'll check that now. The track I was listening to just then was As Sure As I Am by Crowded House, and it kind of stacked the deck a little bit in the Nezha's favour, I think, but it's also giving us some good information. And the reason I say that is that it's a fairly acoustic track with a male vocal. It's more of a tenor vocal, a higher male vocal, and I think it actually favours the Nezha for its mid-range focus. There's not a lot of bass content. There is bass in it, but there's not a lot of it. And for me, what it showed me was that the Nezha, a bit like what I was saying about the Canon 2, the Nezha has a better overall sense of continuity between frequencies. Whereas I feel like the Hype 4 is a little tiny bit up and down. It's not bad, but it's a little tiny bit up and down. And so if you want an IEM that is mid-range focused and you don't care about the bass, I think the Nezha is maybe a little bit better than the Hype 4. Having said that, across multiple genres where you might want more bass, that's where the Hype 4 is going to come back into its own. They're a tiny little bit less natural sounding on some of the frequencies in a very simple track like As Sure As I Am. But I think when you get into something, say, electronic, they're going to absolutely run away with it compared to the Nezha that's going to run out of puff in the lower bass. So it's going to depend a lot on what you're looking for. I still think maybe the Canon 2 is the winner out of these three, but I can see where some people would choose the Nezha, others might choose the Hype 4. They're both really good IEMs. There's not a bad IEM in this set, in fact. And so I'm going to let you decide whether you think the Hype 4 or the Nezha is better for you. And of course, let us know in the comments if you want to share your experiences. But the final thing before we wrap this up is I do want to quickly compare the Hype 4 with the S15. Because the S15 has got a little bit more bass in the tuning, it should be a tighter contest on a more energetic track between these two. So let's quickly test that one and then we'll wrap everything up. The track that I've landed on here is 4 by Blues Traveller, and it immediately shows what I think is the shortcoming of the S15, and that is it's a rock track, it's a fairly energetic track, the bass is lovely, the vocals are good. The problem is with the tuning of the S15s and their slightly upper mid-range focus, the snare drum is the thing that I'm hearing the most, and I can guarantee that no decent engineer mixing audio is going to make the snare the priority in a track, unless it's a drum solo perhaps. But the S15s bring that forward, and I'm not particularly enjoying them for that reason. They're not a bad IEM. They're a very enjoyable and interesting IEM, but they just draw your attention to the wrong things consistently because the emphasis is not in the place where most of the core content of music is, and that's in the mid-range. So let's jump over now and listen to the same track on the Hype 4, and I'll tell you if they do a better job of it, which I expect they're going to. And I was wrong. The Hype 4s have the same problem. It's different. They've got more bass, and so I think it helps to offset it a little bit. But what it's kind of doing on a track like this is it's showing you this bass. It then kind of sucks out a little bit in the lower mids, and then you get this emphasis again in the upper mid range, which once again on the Hype 4 on this track draws your attention to the treble. Now, that's raised the question, is this the track? So I'm going to do one more test. Going back now to the Nezha. I could have gone to the Canon 2, but I'm going to focus on the newies in the collection here. I say collection, these are not staying with me, these are going back. But the point is that the new ones that I'm trying today. So let's go back to the Nezha on this same track being Freedom by Blues Traveller, and we'll see if these also have too much emphasis in the snare area. I'm going to have to eat my words if it is, because it means the engineer has mixed it with too much there. If we're getting it across all different IEMs. Having said that, this is an album I know really well. This is from the album 4 by Blues Traveller, and it's a wonderful album. I've listened to this track many times. It's not the greatest recording, but I've never had that snare jump out so hard as it has from these first two. So listening to that same track on the Nezha, the snare is definitely prominent. There is no doubt about that, but it's prominent in the sense that it's about level with the vocals, and that's been my experience of this track. I've never listened to that track before and just gone snare, 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 snare. When you listen to it through the Nezha, its vocal and snare are kind of equally prominent, and the snare is kind of really driving the track along. So I can kind of understand the mix. I'm not saying how I would have mixed it, but then I'm also not a professional musical engineer. So what I would say is that the Hype 4 and the S15 do have, in my opinion, slightly imbalanced tonalities. The Nezha is doing a better job overall, but it's also imbalanced in its own way because the bass drops away. And so I'm actually going to do one more test again, and that is to just have another quick listen to the Yanyin Canon 2, because I think what I'm hearing here is that the Canon 2 is just going to maintain its place, in my opinion at least, as the best option around this sort of $400 mark, remembering that these came in, I think, at $379 US. And so I think for the money, if you've got that much to spend, the Canon 2 is probably still the one I'd go for. Yep, the Canon 2 is the one that brings it most into line with what I've heard from this track across multiple systems, good systems, good headphones, good speakers. This is the way this track is meant to sound based on my experience. And I think this is representative of what I think a bit of an issue in our current trend of tuning of IEMs, is that there's too much emphasis on coloration, trying to bring out extra details, whether it's emphasizing sub-bass for that sort of punch that the Hype 4 gives you at the expense of some of the lower mid-range and the upper bass, or it's about bringing forwards those upper treble or upper mid-range frequencies like the S15 and again the Hype 4, or it's focusing in on the vocals and pulling away the bass like the Nezha does, like something like the Sivga Nightingale did to an extreme. It's all interesting, and at first listen you're like, wow. But as you listen to more and more tracks and you try more and more different systems and combinations, and then you compare it against something that's actually doing a really good job of having tonal balance, to me and my ears, that's where things start to fall down. And so I'm not really a fan of any of these three in the sense of recommending them. I think they've all got strengths. They all do some things well, and I can totally understand why some people might choose to buy one or more of them. But if it was me, I would just pick up the Canon 2. That to me gives you the best tonal balance of the three, or the four if you're including the Canon. It also gives you the ability to tune it, so if you do want a more mid-range focused sound, just pull back the switches, switch them down into the off position, either one switch or both switches. I just think it makes for the better overall IEM and the more versatile IEM. And so coming out of this, I'm not going to actually recommend any of these three. I'm going to say that I think all three are solid, but I think there's better options out there, such as the Canon 2, or indeed the TONEz 1s. If you want a fun sound, the TONEz 1s version 2 is brilliant. And so I would actually recommend going back and looking at something like the Canon 2, which I reviewed previously on the channel. And so I would recommend putting a lot of thought into which of these IEMs, if you're going to buy any of those three, that being the Nezha, the S15, or the Hype 4, because I think they're all focused in what they're doing, and that may or may not work for your particular genres. So have a think about what it is that you want more of or less of in an IEM, and make sure that aligns with what I've told you about how these sound. Less so the graphs. The graphs aren't necessarily going to be the best way to make your decisions, because different people show graphs in different ways, as I spoke about in one of the previous videos in this series. But more importantly, it's about thinking about where is the emphasis that I've described, and is that the emphasis that you're looking for? Do you want more sub-bass? Go for the Hype 4. Do you like a lot of upper mid-range clarity and detail? Go for the S15. Do you want a more tonally balanced sound with a bit of a mid-range emphasis? Go for the Nezha. Or do you want a better balance from top to bottom? Go for the Canon 2. They're my thoughts at least. Your mileage may differ. We've all got different ear canals. We all have different depths of insertion and different points at which we get frequencies enhanced or cut by the resonance of our ear canals. I've got a whole video on that one called Why All IEM Reviews Are Wrong, so check that one out if you want to know more about that one. But for now, I hope I've been able to paint a bit of a picture for you and help you make your best decision for the IEM that's going to be right for you. If you have found this video useful and helpful, then please hit the like button and subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. As a reminder, if you're in the US and you want to take up that 2-week trial of Aura, then just go to aura.com/passion4sound or use the link in the description below. For now though, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.